matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you.
Boom, we are live, Taylor, and we are happy and not angry.
I'm fine.
Yes,
You're happy.
fine.
You're over. You just vented, and now you feel better.
That's true. That's true. Taylor did hear a little bit of a vent, and the vent is over, and now we're going to think of positive things, and we're going to cover things that are doomed to fail, which is going to be very positive, which tees up our intro very well, Taylor.
Hello. Welcome to Doomed to Fail. We bring you history's most notorious disasters and epic failures twice a week. I am Taylor, joined by Fars, and I'm laughing because I posted about our episode about Friar Diego de Landa, who burned all the Mayan books, on Instagram, and we get comments from people who like don't have any followers and don't have any pictures. So I'm like, what is this? Like, who could this possibly be? But someone was like, one of those people was like, this is not a disaster or a failure. And I was like, actually, it's both. And we do plenty of episodes that are neither. But
was it a real person or a bot?
I don't think so. I don't know what that means. I think it's probably like a weird bot, but like, why would a bot do that? I don't know.
I mean, if it's someone, yeah, I'm fully convinced that the rest of the world is trying to sow chaos.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, of all of our examples, that actually is one. And a lot of times we don't do disasters or failures. We just tell you stories that we think are cool. You're welcome.
I will be doing a disaster and failure today, though, just for full disclosure.
Well, great. Okay. Well, sometimes we do it.
Sometimes we do it. Am I first?
Yeah.
On the board? Okay. Taylor, you're not gonna like this.
I can't wait.
But this is gonna be a relatively quick one too, so you might actually enjoy that. So we've been talking a lot about flights, air travel.
Can't wait.
I mentioned this in a previous episode that the Daily had covered why mental health in the aviation industry is like such a weird conundrum and challenge to kind of cover. And there's one specific flight that was the kind of baseline route for all of these conversations that we're currently having. You know what? I didn't actually put the flight number down. So let me go ahead and pull that up real quick so that people know.
We should change our life mission to like advocating for that high-speed rail they're never going to build in the United States.
Yeah. We joined the Ezra Klein crew.
Yeah, then we talk about train crashes, but whatever.
So I'm going to be covering a flight called Germanwings 9525. Germanwings is a budget airline of Lufthansa, which is like a premium carrier out of Germany. And the flight itself is pretty basic. Mostly what I'm going to be talking about has to do with mental health and what that looks like for commercial pilots.
I remember this because I actually have another friend who's a pilot, who's a German pilot named Stefan, and he was the boyfriend of my German exchange student in like 1999. And when this happened like in the last 10 or so years, right?
Exactly. 2015.
I definitely reached out to Stefan because like, when I met him, he was an 18-year-old kid, and he was like, I want to be a pilot. Now he is a pilot. I don't know if I think he might work for like the next one under Lufthansa, but I was like, are you alive? And he was like, yes, but we're upset. I was like, great.
Yeah, it was a huge deal in Germany, especially. But yeah, I'm going to briefly cover the flight, go into the state of mental health with pilots before this event happened and what the current conditions are of mental health and safety regulations after this happened. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail about the individual that we believe caused this incident to occur. So
a nightmare.
First things first, it turns in like the one part about the flight I'm going to cover. If you were to close your eyes and actually picture it, you'd give yourself a heart attack. We'll talk about that. So first things first, what was the state of mental health amongst commercial pilots before this event occurred, which again was in 2015? Pilot certification mostly focused on physical health and obviously the ability to kind of fly a plane. That was kind of a given, but it was mostly focused on physical health.
I have a question. I kind of want to raise my hand. I don't know how to do that in Zoom. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Is this like an international thing, or are you talking about like Germany, or are the rules different in other places?
Rules are different in different places.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. The standards that I'm going to cover now are essentially ubiquitous. The safety regulations that went into effect after this, they became kind of fractured amongst different countries and regulatory bodies. So Before this event, again, physical health was the most obvious thing that airlines would test for to make sure that your heart had the ability to kind of pump, all that stuff. There was no forced psychological evaluations as part of the process of getting certified as a commercial air pilot. Mental health was only addressed when it would be self-reported by a pilot. But like we mentioned before, there's a lot of downsides to self-reporting mental health issues. If they disclose they're having these issues, then they can be forcibly grounded, they can be suspended, it could be career ending. It can turn you
Yeah.
into a pariah amongst your colleagues, which isn't good. And probably the worst aspect of it is that there's also not a clear path to how a pilot can get back to flying again after addressing their mental health issues. It was kind of just like there was no one size fits all, which there shouldn't be with mental health, but there was no obvious track that's like, hey, I'm going to report myself. So I need to be on paid medical leave for 6 months.
Right.
And then I want to get a reevaluation in like 2 months and another one in 2 months. And I'm back to flying in 6 months. Like that wasn't a standard practice.
Yeah.
So, in addition to that, due to data privacy laws, in the US, they're HIPAA laws, but they have them in Europe as well, obviously. Doctors are in a legal gray zone in terms of what they have to mandatorily report based on concerns around safety. And unless it's a clear and imminent danger, doctors do not have to report this. And even if there is a clear and imminent danger, it's all subjective. And I learned that Germany generally has like a very insular culture of privacy, and they're less vocal about things like this. Like, you know, here in the US we have things like red flag laws where if you think somebody's a danger and they have a firearm, then you can call the police and there's no issues with that. But Germany seems to
Hmm.
have a lot more kind of self-reliant culture, I guess.
Hmm.
So that's going to play into this as well. The issue of mental health and pilots has been around even before Germanwings. So I'm thinking back to 1997. There was a flight called Silk Air Flight 185 when the pilot turned off the flight data and cockpit voice recorders, and then the nosedived the plane into the ground, killing 104 people. 2 years later, Egypt Air Flight 990. That was when the first pilot took control of the plane while the other pilot was in the bathroom, and then nosedived the plane into the Atlantic Ocean, killing 217 people. So this had happened
I
before.
feel like why isn't that on my nightmare rotation?
Well, lucky for you, it now is.
It is now. Um, oh my God, I know we talked about like making sure that you when you're on like a boat, you look at the person and you're like, I'm
I'm
going to jump off
here.
this boat. I'm here. I also do that to captains. I'm like, look at me. Look how cute. Look at my family. Look at us. Look at us.
Look how cute we are.
Think about how much we have to live for.
Yeah,
You know, if I
I like
ever,
your plan.
there's a Golden Girls episode where they're like at the airport bar and a guy's been drinking and he gets up and the guy's like, have a good flight, Captain. And he goes, thanks. He turns around and bumps into a pole and then keeps going. And the girls are like, oh my God.
You know what I never researched is where did the whole drunk pilot trope come from?
I don't know.
It'd be interesting to dig back into that.
Hmm.
So we had these issues that had happened around mental health of pilots. Some of that stuff is hard to kind of track down too because there is no a lot of these cases. There's no conclusive evidence of what happened because again, the cockpit flight recorder was shut off or the data recorder was shut off, and then they just nosedived. And so there could be a situation where somebody had like a heart ailment and just leaned over the column. We don't know for sure. It wasn't a for sure thing in those two situations. But
I have
German
another
Air,
question.
yeah,
So sorry.
no.
So why can't now that I'm thinking of it, you mentioned oh, there was like a black box you have to find that has all this information of what happened. Why isn't that just like being automatically transmitted into like a place on land?
I bet it probably
Always.
is now.
Okay, good.
I
I
bet
mean,
it
I
prob-
bet it probably is too. I feel like why do you rely on this box when we have satellites?
the only thing I can think of about why they might not want to do that is because the volume of data would be so massive, it would be bigger than all the AI companies combined in terms of what it records, and so maybe that could
Yeah.
be a limitation. But I would assume they're doing that now.
Yeah.
So again, these all happened in like the late 1990s. German Wing was the one that kind of set off the alarm bells within the industry, and it was a lot more of a conclusive, cut and dry. Yeah, this is actually what ended up happening. And also, I think part of that is because it was after 9/11. Like all this, I mean, before 9/11, people don't know that like, if you're young enough, you used to like walk in through the security checkpoint and like see your family off on their flight. Like it was like we weren't as stringent about things before
Now
then.
that I think about that, that sounds awful. Like I remember it, but also like doesn't that like triple the number of people going through security?
It does seem like a weird obligation too.
Yeah.
Also, security was a joke back then.
Yeah. So,
So,
yeah, you're right.
so let's talk about the flight itself. The flight took off from Barcelona on March 24th, 2015, with 144 passengers, 160 crew, and it was headed to Dusseldorf, Germany. It took off at just around 10 a.m. local time, and 30 minutes later, it started to descend from its 38,000-foot cruising altitude. Air traffic control saw this and frantically tried to get a hold of the pilots and was unable to, and essentially declared an emergency. French military jets, because at this point had crossed over into France, they were scrambled and sent to intercept the plane, but they didn't get to it in time, and the plane was recorded as having crashed into a mountain range just north of Nice at 435 miles per hour. Obviously, everybody was dead.
Yeah, no.
So what was going on here? We're going to start with the pilot. So there's two pilots, and the commanding pilot was a guy named Captain Patrick Sondenheimer. He was 34 years old. He had a ton of flying experience commercially. He was kind of the guy in charge. Also, 34 seems kind of young, but maybe that's just me.
It does, but
Yeah. The other pilot was a guy named Andreas Lubitz, a 27-year-old junior pilot who was trained by Lufthansa and then employed by Germanwings about a year after this ended up happening. Before that, he was a flight attendant for Lufthansa while he was kind of moonlighting and doing his training stuff. The investigation began by collecting the flight data and cockpit voice recorders. The prevailing theory is that the captain, Sondenheimer, left the cockpit for a bathroom break 30 minutes after taking off. And post 9/11, cockpit doors were reinforced and controlled mostly from the inside. On the
hmm
outside, there is a code that can be punched to gain access, but that code can be overridden and the door remain locked from the inside. And the reason for that is if a pilot goes outside, somebody grabs them and says punch the code in, like you need to be able to override it. And
yep.
so that's essentially what ended up happening here.
Like whenever the
Invest
pilot goes to the bathroom, they like put that little wall up, and this flight attendants just stand there and stare at you. And I'm like, can we get him back at his
I
job,
know
please?
this
Can he pee
doesn't feel
faster?
it does
Can we
not
get him?
feel safe.
Can we get him some sort of bucket that he can just pee in? I mean, I don't want to like dehumanize his job, but like I'd like him to stay at it and not.
Or
I
why
want him to
don't
pee
you
his
just have
pants like Amelia
another
Earhart.
door on the other side of the bathroom, and then when the pilot opens that door, it locks the main bathroom door, so that somebody can't just go in from there.
Yeah.
We should be plane designers.
You know what? We've really opened up our career opportunities already in this episode, so I'm excited for us.
Yes, yes. So the prevailing theory is that the captain Sondenheimer he left the cockpit for a bathroom break. And investigators think that what happened is that Lubitz overrode the code and locked the door from the inside. Sondenheimer tried his code and realized it didn't work, and he was heard on the cockpit voice recorder pounding on the door and asking Lubitz to open the door. While all this is happening, the plane is descending rapidly. Way too early. Everybody knew it was way too early for this thing to be descending.
hmm
Some of the dramatizations around this had people asking the flight attendant, like, wait, there's no chance we're here already, right? Like, why are we going down so much?
Ugh.
We later will learn that Lubitz had set the desired altitude on the plane to 100 feet. And
It's too
I
low.
think at this point, Sondenheimer is realizing what's going on.
Ugh.
This is the part that's like nightmare fuel for me. He's given what's called a crash axe, I think it's called. It's some sort of axe they keep on board for some reason. And, oh, probably for crashes. Actually, that's
Well,
sorry.
probably. It reminds me of the I don't know if this is true, but it reminds me of the crowbar that I came under my bed now to get out of the door just in case of an earthquake.
Yeah,
So you
you
probably
gotta
might have
have it.
to axe your way out of a plane.
Yeah, yeah. As I literally spoke the words, it occurred to me why they have this there. Um, so picture this. On the flight
I
recorder,
mean, okay.
we can indicate that we know that Sondenheimer, as he was screaming frantically to Lubitz to open the door, he was also smashing the door in full view of the passengers to break into the cockpit. How scary is
Nope.
that?
That's it. Yep. Nope. Hate it.
So investigators would say that on the cockpit voice recorder, you could hear the passengers screaming. Like everybody knew this was going on.
Oh God.
And ultimately, we know what happened. We just said that it crashed into a mountain at 435 miles per hour. So that's where it kind of ended. It was also learned that on the from the flight data recorder, it was learned that on the previous flight, the one that brought it from Dusseldorf to Barcelona before they did the turnaround back to Dusseldorf, Sonderheimer had also stepped out of the cockpit, and the flight data recorder showed that someone had set the altitude to 100 feet, like flipped it back and forth a couple of times while he was away. So like he was practicing.
Just thinking about it.
He was
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about it. He was practicing it.
yeah. Ugh.
So the investigators start focusing on Lubitz and search through his apartment and find a letter from a doctor indicating that he was unfit for flying.
Well,
They also found two types of medications for depression and a prescription grade sleeping pill. One of those medications, which is the street name or the pharmaceutical name for it, is Lexapro. It's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI, which like is a super long name. I don't even know what that means. But SSRIs are known to potentially cause suicidal ideation. It's
mhm.
particularly bad and present in younger people, but can also impact adults. The FDA's analysis of SSRIs found that people 25 years old or younger have the highest risk of suicidal ideation, and Lubitz, like we already mentioned, was 27.
It's so I don't understand that. Like I take an SSRI and I've been taking it for like 15 years and it's great. I feel fucking awesome.
Is it
Um,
Lexapro?
no, I take Zoloft. But before that, I was like super depressed, and now I'm not. I'm not like super happy, but I'm not like laying in bed all day. Um, but it's just so weird that like it can stop me from being depressed, but it also comes with suicidal ideation. Like, what is that in your brain? How does that even work?
I don't think that medical science actually knows why any of this stuff works the way it does and who it works on. I think that we're not
Right?
quite there yet.
It's really
Um,
crazy that it can be
and
both.
And like I said, it's worth noting that it's not as common in like older adults than it is in younger adults.
Yeah.
So, and it's not every SSRI. Like they specifically called out Lexapro.
Wow.
So, investigators would search Lubitz's computer and found that he had been searching for ways to commit suicide and even ran. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. He started taking Lexapro 9 days before this happened. And it's worth noting that the ideations are the most intense
In the
right when you
beginning.
start taking it.
Yeah.
So again, the search of the computer found that he'd been searching for ways to commit suicide and even ran searches on cockpit doors and how secure they were.
Wait, I also think we should now we should monitor pilots' Google history.
I know. I mean, yeah, let's just make it impossible for anybody to be a pilot. You know what? Why don't we just do drones? Suicidal drone operator. That's why. That was a trick question, Taylor. Oh wait, they wouldn't commit suicide in that case. Never mind.
No, you've got I am as like unsafe that I feel it would be to be in a place that has a bunch of self-driving cars just like driving around. I kind of feel like self-driving planes would be safe.
I think self-driving everything would be safer than humans.
But I feel nervous about like self-driving cars all on the road together.
I
I
mean,
feel
now, right, I can empathize with that because right now, like, it's not a ubiquitous technology. But I assume, like, by the time we're dead
yeah.
and it's ubiquitous in every car, like, I
Hmm.
would assume they would create like a central nervous system where they all communicate with each other. So every car knows where every other car in its vicinity is, and they're
Yeah.
communicating back and forth their intentions. And like,
Hmm.
that's when it gets safe. Like, I would agree.
And then they enslave the humans and we live in car world.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get what we deserve.
down. So. As investigators dug further into Lubitz's history, they found that shortly after joining that trainee program with Lufthansa, he was hospitalized for severe depressive episodes. And it wasn't until like nearly a year later that he was medically cleared to continue his training. He was also having other issues. He seemed convinced for some reason that he was going blind. In addition to all the other psychological problems that he was having, he apparently visited 40 doctors to like confirm that he's going blind and check his vision. Despite the fact
Mm.
there was no indication, every doctor reports like you're fine, you see perfectly well. Like, there's no deterioration whatsoever. You're
Did he
thinking.
did he mention that he was a pilot?
So a lot came out of this, Taylor, that was like, why didn't any of you doctors re report this to his employer? Like,
Right.
why? And so much of the dialogue around this has to do with Germany's,
Privacy laws.
well, then like the culture of secrecy of like, hey, it's your
Hmm.
business, it's not my business. Like, I'm not going to intrude on your life. You do you. But I mean, I mean, they could have stopped a lot of problems if they were a little more intrusive in what other people are doing.
I'm not gonna, yeah. I do feel as I'm saying this that like there's gonna be like four pilots left after we like do all of this, like
I know.
in 10 years anyway. They're old and they're gonna retire, or people are gonna be like, why am I gonna put up with this shit and then not do it?
Yeah. Well, the money. I think pilots make exceedingly good salaries too, don't they?
I think it's like you could also be a software engineer.
Yeah. That's, well, not in 10 years, probably not. But
Can't be either.
actually, we're all replaced in 10 years. So
I'm gonna
what
be a
am I talking
train
about?
conductor. Yeah.
Be a train conductor. That actually would be fun. So after Germanwing, the system underwent some reforms. A two-person cockpit rule went into effect, meaning that at all times, two people have to be in the cockpit. But as you literally just stated when you gave the example of when the stewardess stands in front with little box things, the
Hmm.
it is sort of being used and sort of not being used. It's not
Yeah.
ubiquitous. And Lufthansa themselves rolled it back after 2 years. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to actually be that helpful to do this. And a lot of places don't do it. It's an airline by airline thing. It's not like a legal requirement anymore. The European version of the FAA, called the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, they now make pre-employment psychological screenings mandatory for all new pilots. This includes a personality test, an assessment, behavioral evaluation, and background checks. But this is a one-off evaluation. There's no ongoing process for health monitoring throughout a pilot's career, which you should probably have.
Yeah.
There's now a return to duty practice, which includes regular check-ins with an aviation medical examiner and conditional reinstatement after clearing a psych eval after being grounded. So like now there are processes in place where there is a path back to being able to fly again. There are now airline run support groups by pilots for pilots where they can confidentially talk to other pilots and disclose what is going on in their minds without fear of retribution or being grounded.
That's nice.
Doctors can now report serious concerns about airworthiness to airlines without violating patient privacy laws. Again, that's up to the doctor to decide that that's a serious
Hmm.
safety concern. They should report it, and not all of them have. Uh, for what it's worth, about 2 years after the crash of this Germanwing flight, Lubitz's parents came out and said they don't think their son did any of this and that something else was going on. But it's worth noting that the only other explanation is that he died mid-flight,
Yeah.
and even then he would have he still manually set to 100 feet the
Yeah.
altitude. And it's also worth noting that in the cockpit voice recorder, he was audibly heard like breathing, like he was there, like he was definitely there. So that's where it kind of ended, and
Um,
now we're having planes bump into each other midair, which is nice,
and on the ground,
and on the ground
which
everywhere.
is not
Plane
great.
bumper planes.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate that. I found my message to Stefan from Facebook from March 24th, 2015. I said, "You're alive, yes?" And he said, "Yes, I'm alive." Flies with Air Berlin. He said, "We're all very sad and shocked. He was flying to Rome and had two passengers on his plane to Rome that lost their sister on the Germanwings flight." He said, "It's pure horror, but how are you?" So,
Jeez, I can't
yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's my story. To be fair, there actually after this event, there's really been only one situation where a pilot tried to do something. I think it was Alaskan Airlines, and it was a pilot that was catching a flight on the jump seat or whatever inside the cockpit. So he wasn't actually supposed to be flying the plane, but what he did mid-flight was he reached over and turned off the engines of the plane.
Was that the guy
And
who was on shrooms?
yes, well, he was on shrooms like that weekend, and then he got on the
Hmm.
plane and had an anxiety attack and flipped out and it did that. But ever since then, like it actually hasn't been that frequent that pilots have done this, which is good.
That's good.
Yeah, positive silver lining. See that?
Yeah,
We're our happy show.
good.
Um, so, anyways, that's my story. Hopefully, it was at least somewhat interesting.
It is interesting. It's terrifying, but interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, the image of people seeing the captain trying to break in, that had to be like, man,
Nope. Nope. Terrible.
yeah.
Terrible. Terrible. Yeah.
Sweet. What do you got for us, Taylor?
I want to say thank you to Nadine and Juan who joined our Patreon. We appreciate you.
We're not gonna shame anybody, but you know who
Mm-hmm.
you are if you
You know who
haven't.
you are.
Hmm.
Um, and thank you very much. We really appreciate it. It's super cool that we have your support. Just a reminder, you can join Patreon. It's $5 a month just to help us grow. And then later, if we ever have ads, you will not have ads. That's the way it goes. It's there. It's that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I watched The Island of Dr. Moreau and I asked you a question via text because I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that the guy who Lupin from Harry Potter plays was supposed to be played by Bruce Willis, but then he was played by the guy in Northern Exposure. What's that guy's name again?
Rob Morrow.
Rob Morrow. And I was like, but you never talk about Rob Morrow again. And you were like, oh, right, I forgot to tell you. So can you tell everybody what happened to Rob Morrow?
Yeah, what happened to Rob Morrow is that 2 days after principal filming started, he went into the set that was the ship and he called the CEO of New Line Cinema crying, saying, "Please, I will do anything if you just let me off this movie. This is unbelievable. It's chaos." And he actually, his biggest issue was he was like, the energy is so negative. Alex Schumer was such a jerk, and the director was so not ready to do this that he was like, I can't handle like the stress of being here,
Yeah,
and they granted him the ability to kind of leave. So
that's nice.
yeah, I mean, was he not even in a single scene? I assume not.
No,
Yeah, okay.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, there
That's
you
so
go.
funny. Good
So
for him.
yeah,
Um,
and then I also mentioned at Taylor that the character of Mini-Me, in the Austin Powers series
mhm.
also was derived from Marlon Brando's relationship with, I forgot what the name of that small actor is, that 17-foot tall man.
17 inches. And also, he was nude a lot of the movie, the small man.
That makes it so much better for some reason.
I mean, I think if you haven't watched it, I think you should, everyone. It's on YouTube. It's only an hour and a half, which I also think is crazy because movies an hour, like 8 hours long. And I was like, all that for an hour and a half movie. And it is everything that, yeah.
Did you enjoy watching it?
I did. I did enjoy it. I would watch it again.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The whole time you're like, what?
It's like it's a fever dream,
It's a
but
fever dream
it's
because also like there's what is the science is so funny because there's like no science to this obviously and like Dr. Moreau allegedly like won a Nobel Prize and the guy's like, oh, I remember him, he's a great scientist. And there's like a part where Marlon Brando's just like holding a petri dish and he's like, look at this, you're like, I guess that's what science is. If you're like ask a third grader to show you a lab, they'd be like, here's my graduating cylinder and my petri dish, I'm a scientist.
that's so funny. I was hoping there'd be like something in terms of a scientific, like the way Jurassic Park explained it. It was like, oh, this actually kind of tracks. Like this makes sense.
No, no, they
Nothing.
didn't like explain DNA or anything.
Jeez. All right.
Cool. Well, thank you, Fars. Thank you, everyone. We are at Doomed to Fail Pod on all social media, doomedtofailpod@gmail.com. If you have any ideas, let us know.
And we, oh yeah, and okay, you just said it, and we have the Patreon.
We do. You can
So
join.
yes, you already
It's
said that. Okay,
$5. Thank you.
cool. We'll go ahead and cut off there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks.